Welcome to the Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. I'm your host, renowned sex and relationship coach, Amanda Testa. And if you are looking to reclaim your sexual desire, take sex from a to-do to something you look forward to, and enjoy deeply connected relationships without adding more to your already full plate, then you are in the right place. Listen in to discover how to fan the flames of your feminine fire, fall in love with your sensual self again, and experience intimacy like never before, all in a way that feels really good to your system. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Did you know that astrology can be a portal to discovering our sexual selves? You know, I'm all about this. And if you're excited how to expand your erotic landscape with the stars, then listen up because you are going to love this episode. This week, I'm talking with clinical sexologist and astrologer Stefanie Iris Weiss, and we're going to be diving into exploring sexuality and how astrology plays a part in really helping you to expand your pleasure and your feminine fire and all of the juiciness that will unfold. So welcome, Stefanie. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yay. And this is exciting because you just read a new book called Sex and the Stars, an astrologer's guide to the erotic energy of the Zodiac. And I am curious because I love the merging of these two things. I'm curious, what inspired you to dive into this intersection of astrology and sexology? And just tell me a little bit more about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, you know, for many, many years, I was a practicing astrologer. I've been a practicing astrologer for 20 years. I'm dating myself. And I always found that when I would work with clients, they would ask me questions about their sexuality, their sex life. And I always felt really, really comfortable answering these questions. And there was no reason for them. I didn't become a sex writer and start my professional career in sexuality until about 10 years ago. But this predated that time. And it was just like, it's part of why I chose to do it, because everybody was just like, you seem to know something about this. And felt really, really comfortable having these conversations with me. And this was many years ago. And there have been so many wonderful books about the astrology of love, the astrology of sexual compatibility. There are great books in this whole, arena, but no one had really done anything about like exploring your deep sovereign sexuality through astrology. And during the pandemic, I became certified as a clinical sexologist and sex coach. And I started doing this monthly column where I was talking about these issues and also writing horoscopes and incorporating the erotic energy of whatever was going on into the horoscopes, and people really responded. So that's in part how the book came to be.
I love that so much because I even remember when I was in college, there was that big purple astrology book. And every time I would always try to figure out if someone I was into, like, what's their sign? Is it compatible or not? But I love this because I feel like the more opportunities we have to explore our eroticism in different ways, we can really find something that resonates with us. And so I think it's like being able to explore it makes it, it just piques the curiosity, right? And I think that is such an opening to like explore.
Yes. And the shame piece is also a huge part of this book, like helping people work through whatever it is that they're carrying, another way to frame and understand our shame. And we have shame that comes from cultural sources and our parents and everything, right? Somehow blocks our sexuality because of shame. And it's just not necessary to have to go through that. So I wanted to contribute another way for people to work through their shame. I have found in my work over the last couple of decades that when you look at the chart, when you look at someone's chart, and even just their sun or rising or moon sign or their Venus or their Mars, you can find markers, archetypal markers of the shape the shame will take. And that's another way to help people peel that away so they can reconnect to pleasure.
I love that so much. And I want to come back to that in a minute. But yeah. I also am curious too, because we know just like culturally, our sexuality has been forced underground historically, right? So has astrology, these were threats to the oppressive systems out there. And so I'd love if you maybe could speak a little bit about how you think exploring these desires through this lens can be liberating. And I think that's part of the shame too. So I would love if you could speak to that if you don't mind.
Yes, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up. I mean, liberation is the key word that is like threaded through the entire book. Astrology is another way to break through and to liberate ourselves. And I have a chapter in the book about Black Moon Lilith, which is this basically like the feminist point in our charts, right? Like it's like the fuck the patriarchy point in our chart. And it is a place also where we tend to carry a lot of sexual shame. And I feel like if we can use our charts to find the places where we experience shame and then liberate that, we can just experience so much more pleasure in our daily lives and connecting to our own bodies and our partners if we're interested in being partnered at any particular time.
I'm curious too, because I know you talk a lot about kind of like the archetypes and how you can use that to kind of figure out what those shame points are, like kind of work around that and release the shame, because that is a huge thing. You know, I've been a sex coach for over 10 years, and that is like one of the most debilitating things. And so I love even just these conversations and shining a light on this is not unique, right? We all have this. And so when we can kind of just like open the doorway, but maybe can you share a little bit about how you can relate to your chart and be able to release some of that shame? Or could you talk a little bit more about that process?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, what I try to do this when I work with clients individually and in the book, is to first show the reader or the client what their sexual power is, right? Like what their desire nature might be, what they might want. And if they could really show up in their authentic self and their desire and their kind of like raw sexuality, if they can identify what that is and feel a thrill about that, we can then walk into the doorway of the shame and see what's there and what is being blocked. And you can do this, like, for instance, I'm an Aries. The book starts with Aries at the beginning of the Zodiac, the first sign of the Zodiac. It's fire sign. And what a lot of Aries tend to experience, and I've experienced this myself, is shame around being too much, being too aggressive, being too assertive, too raw, right? Like wanting too much. So that's one of the ways that you can identify something that is actually wonderful and powerful, break down how patriarchy and our culture, especially for people who identify as women, right, tell us that you can't be that. You shouldn't be that. It's not appropriate. It's not feminine. It's not whatever, right? And how we can break through that and realize how much access to our erotic power embracing that can give us. And typically what happens is we might be more in touch with that before our sexuality even begins to develop, or right around the time it begins to develop. Like I tell a story in the book about how when I was 12, I was at a bat mitzvah on Long Island where I grew up, and there was a Madonna song. Now I'm dating myself again. Burning Up by Madonna came on. And I tell the whole story, but I basically like dove onto the dance floor and started dancing wildly by myself without any shame, because I didn't know I needed to feel shame for that. And then the song ended and I looked up and all the parents were looking at me like, and that is when I began to feel some shame. And it was just this sort of like, desire to move, that was moving through me. There was nothing wrong with that. Right. And so I had to go through a whole process of re-embracing it. And it was definitely connected to my sun in Aries and the other fire in my chart for sure.
Oh, I love that story. But I think so many of us can relate to those kind of stories because, we aren't taught. I mean, we don't come out ashamed, right? But we learned that. I mean, I have a memory like that too, because I remember when I was like 6 and we had just moved into a new house and there was no curtains up and we lived on a busy street, and I'd like gotten out of the bath and I was like dancing around in front of the window, just like having the time of my life. And my mom was like, so right. I think we don't realize how those things really make an imprint.
They really make an imprint. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm curious for you, like even just in those examples, how might that show up in someone's life today, like around their sexuality, right? Say they have that shame. How does that show up?
And if they haven't unpacked it, right? So like if we stick with the example of Aries.
Yes.
So someone who didn't have the opportunity like I did to work through it and unpack it and then, eventually make this my work, it can show up anger, bitterness, rigidity, and ability to connect to that spark of desire. So you have blocked it so many times, right? Because people have told you that it was too much or it was bad or it was like in a religious culture that it was like evil or, the devil or whatever it is, right? Like this raw desire that you have, you can't even find it anymore. And it can make a person flat, and it could make a person feel like they don't even know what turn on even means anymore, right? With Aries, one of the things that is so special and wonderful about Aries energy, for instance, is that very, very often an unconflicted, what I call healthy Aries energy, unobstructed Aries energy can show up as like you are standing in front of someone and you're like, you sniff them and you're like, okay, this is happening, right? Like this is real, right? But a person who has experienced that shame over and over might not even be able to connect to that sort of like immediate sensory connection to their desire, right? Like that hunting instinct that Aries may have, right? And there's nothing wrong with that as long as no one is being hurt by that and consent is present and all of that kind of thing, right? Experiencing that feeling is perfectly normal and good.
I'm guessing this is part of the erotic energy mapping that you do, or that they can learn from like diving deeper into the book. And I'm curious, can you walk me through a little bit more of like what that looks like, how they can go about finding this for themselves? And like, I love maybe even diving into some of the more superpowers, because I think that's exciting.
Okay, I love this question. So what I would do if I were working with a client doing erotic energy mapping, what I would do is I would begin to, well, first of all, I always start with doing an intake with the person. So for erotic energy mapping sessions, I would do the same thing that I would do for like a regular clinical sexology session, right? I would want to know what they've been experiencing, what's going on with their libido, what their goals are, what their fears are, what their experience, their whole history. And then I will look at their chart. I'll get their birth information. I'll look at their chart and I'll see where the planets, the basic sun sign energy, obviously, because one of the things that I do in the book is I explain there's so many different ways of doing astrology, right? And different astrologers have different ideas of like what the sun means in a chart or whatever. But in this particular way of doing astrology, my version of sexual astrology, I look at the sun as our vitality, right? Like, so that is the way that it connects to our sexuality. What is our sexual vitality? And that doesn't mean the sex itself is always going to be, or the sexual desire itself is always going to be, it can be soft is what I'm trying to say. It can be soft. It can be nurturing. That's still the vitality of the sun sign. So what I do in an erotic energy mapping session is I identify where that vitality lives in the chart. So what sign it's in, what house is it in. I will also look at Venus and Mars and their relationship to each other. I'll look at the ascendant and the chart ruler. And as I mentioned before, Black Moon Lilith. So we can really peel away at what might be getting in the way, via patriarchy. Where is that like resentment? Where is that? What happened to you? What did you learn about what you're not supposed to feel? And how can we give you access to that again? It's kind of a short version of what a session like that would look like.
And just kind of even when we think about the vitality, right? Like those are the gifts that we innately have.
Yes.
Right. Obviously, depending on what other imprints happened along the way, we may or may not have access to that, right? But
yes.
I'm curious, like when you're feeling into that is something that's just there, right? You don't have to do anything. You have that. How does that apply? How can you help people connect to that? So maybe even if you just want to stick with the Aries example, or I know we talked earlier that like I'm a Cancer, ways that someone can use that in their life to really enhance, like maybe if you have an example from a client or something that you could share.
Yes. Well, one of the things that the book does, and I think that this is I'm going to answer your question in a minute, but I just want to pop this in first because I feel like it applies. The book also walks us through the astrological season. So you can use it not just for your unique astrology chart or a partner's chart to work through that, but you can use it across the seasons, which then helps you to connect to that energy within you and vis-a-vis your own chart. So we're recording this during Taurus season, right? Which is when we have access to sensuality like in no other moment through the rest of the year. So special to me for this particular work. But if I was working with you, the Cancer client, I would say, what can you do, not just during Taurus season, but overall? Like, how can you use your access to the lunar energies, right? Because Cancer is ruled by the moon, right? And always changeable, because the moon changes signs every 2.5 days, right? So Cancers can tap into, people with strong Cancer placements can tap into the way that the moon moves through the zodiac each month, right? Like connecting to the way that I do in the book, like over the course of an entire year of astrological sun sign seasons, you can actually do that in a month. So you can be like, the moon is in Leo right now. So how can I practice connecting to my desire through a Leonian lens? Like what is hot and fiery for me right now? What feels alive for me right now? And then when the moon moves into Virgo, how can I refine that? How can I like pay attention to the details of what my body is telling me? How can I pay attention to my sexual health, for instance? That's one of the great things about Cancer placements is that you actually have like an extra, you have an extra way of connecting through the entire zodiac every single month as the moon moves through each sign. And I would also say for Cancers, one of the ways to connect to your own body and your emotional body is just by connecting to the moon itself. Like if you are a Cancer or have Cancer placements and you don't have a relationship with the actual moon, meaning like, do you go outside at night and look at the moon? Do you open your window and gaze at the moon? You know, what is your relationship to the phases of the moon? Like, are you paying attention to when it's a full moon, when it's a new moon? That's another way to reconnect to your sexuality by seeing what are you feeling erotically when you gaze at the moon, for instance. That's another way that you can approach it.
Hey, it's Amanda. If you are enjoying the show and felt a connection to what we've discussed, and you're ready to take the next step in reigniting your passion and enhancing your relationships, I have something special for you. Visit www.amandatesta.com/thegoods, where you can subscribe to my email. And if you want, you can sign up for a free personalized sensuality discovery session with me. In this one-on-one heart-to-heart session, we'll explore your unique desires, uncover any challenges, and set a path for you to experience the vibrant, fulfilling love life you deserve. Don't let another day pass feeling unfulfilled or disconnection. Take action now, and let's start this beautiful journey together to fire up your feminine fire. Join me at amandatesta.com/thegoods. I'm excited to stay connected. Now back to the show. I have a very deep relationship with the moon, and that
I'm so glad. Does it feel like an erotic relationship? Can you answer that?
It does, and it definitely is cyclical. And it's so interesting because I've been not only like tracking the moon, but also tracking my own menstrual cycle for like 20 plus years. And it's so interesting how it can shift, but typically, and like right now, my cycle is such that I usually am ovulating on the new moon, which that shifted just, a few months ago. It was like last year. I mean, it shifts, right? So sometimes it's when I ovulate on the full moon. And it also changes what day of the month it is, where the moon is. I mean, it definitely, I feel it in my body. And there's typical things that I can realize, right? And I'm like, okay, what's today? All right, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah. I love the way it shifts. I love the way I have observed with my cycle, the way like it shifts. It seems to shift seasonally as well. Like I get like deep into like midsummer, right? Like, I will watch it moving every couple of days. And then I'll realize that, I shifted from like over the course of a season, I shifted from bleeding on the new moon to bleeding on the full moon. It's just incredible how our bodies are connected to the moon. It's truly
I feel too, yeah, like depending on the day, there's more just connection, like even just connection to the earth and like being turned on by nature, all of that. It's
Yes.
amazing. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
finding the eroticism in all of life.
Yeah, and it is everywhere, right? And I talk in the book about eco-sexuality, which is another topic that
Yes.
I've written about. And it's like Taurus season is the season for eco-sex and eco-sexuality. And that's one of the things that I want to get across in this book as well, is that astrology is really like a nature worship in a kind of in a way, right? Like that's what we're doing. Like, I mean, we really are just like being with the seasons, right? I mean, especially tropical astrology, which is the kind that I practice. And there's eroticism in the trees. There's eroticism in the sky. There's eroticism in the ocean and the moon and all of that. Like, and if you can just be with nature quietly, you can attune to your erotic relationship to nature and how it enhances. And when that opens up for people during Taurus season, if you, like in the book, the Taurus season practices, hopefully will help people to do that. It just blossoms through the rest of the year.
Oh, I love that. And I do love how the book, depending on which zodiac sign you have, like the great ways to connect with the different energies and the practices, because I feel like pleasure practicing is anyone who knows me in this podcast knows that is one of my greatest thrills in life, because it is, oftentimes a lot of these things are right out there. They're ideas, but then you're like, but how do I use it in my daily life? And that's the beauty of the practice. So I'm wondering if you might be willing to share maybe one or two of your favorite practices around that.
Yes. Why don't we talk about the Cancer season practice for you? And because we've already been talking about the moon. So the way that I frame it in the book, after I walk people through their erotic gifts and their erotic challenges, is that there's a practice, as you mentioned, meditation, a practice at the end of the chapter. And in the Cancer chapter, I call it the Erotic Moon Gaze. And what I ask people to do, I don't have the book in front of me, so I'm not going to be able to walk through it like, the exact words that you can use, but yes, you can really use your own script. I give a sample script there, but either alone or with a partner, going out during Cancer season. And I think like the thing that I want people to understand is like these practices, you can start them during the season that the sun is in a particular sign to experience the aliveness of that particular energy, because it's so prevalent when we're in the season. But you can continue to, you don't have to like stop doing the erotic moon gaze practice just because it's going to be Libra season. Like if it works for you, keep doing it. But the erotic moon gaze is going out under the moon when the moon is, it doesn't have to be completely full, but it's nice to do it under a full moon or an almost full moon. So identify when that is happening. You can go online and do that like instantly, or using an ephemeris or a little astrological app or calendar, and go out when the moon has risen. Take a little bit of some kind of food with you. It can be anything. It could be some granola, some whatever it is. But have something to eat. And you go out under the moon. If you live in a city, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because there's an undressing element to this. So if you don't have a private outdoor space and you are concerned about being unclothed potentially, that's something to consider. But if you do have a private outdoor space, say you're going out in your backyard and you don't have nosy neighbors, this is where you start. So go out under the moon and you basically gaze up at the moon and tune into the way your body feels under the moon. Feel the energy, feel that lunar energy in your body. See if you feel it. See if there is an erotic charge there. Just listen, pay attention, move through, see where you may feel that moon energy in your heart. You may feel it in your hands. You may feel it in your pelvis, right? You may feel it around your second chakra. You may feel turned on by it if you listen to it, right? If you listen to it, if you pay attention to it, if you tune into it. Most of us don't. Like most of us will go out under the moon and we'll be like, oh, that's beautiful, or we'll just like get to where we're going and not really paying any attention. We may experience the moon in a moment of like wonderment and wow, but we don't often try to attune to the moon erotically. So that's really what I'm asking people to do. So that's what we begin with. And then the process continues where you might take off one item of clothing and connect again to the moon's energy, and then continue that process and see where it takes you and how you feel. And then you kind of, if you can do this by yourself or with a partner, but the food that you've brought out, you kind of like feeding each other, feeding yourself or feeding each other the energy of the moon. So you're imagining that the moon is imbuing the food that you're eating with its lunar energy, and then you are then digesting it.
I love that so much. That now, I think everyone should give it a try, right? Because that is making me excited.
Yeah, and the book has a whole. I'm probably explaining the practice a little bit differently than I do in the book, because every time I talk about it, like I think I like add more elements to it. I'm like, oh, well, that sounds fun. So, so if you read the book, you'll see the whole script and the specific ideas and ways to get around doing it so that you can figure out how to do it no matter where you are. So it's safe and feels comfortable.
Yeah. Make it your own. Yeah. I think one of the things that you were mentioning earlier is you did a lot of unpacking from the time when you were like dancing freely on the dance floor, and then all the adults were like, oh my goodness, what is she doing? And so I'm curious, growing up, do you feel like you had a pretty sex positive environment? Do you feel like that's a lot of that of the work that you've done? Can you share a little bit about that? If you don't
Yes. I actually did have a very wonderful sex positive environment growing up, like in my home. But that's the thing, right? Like you can have that in your home and then go out into the world and everything can come crashing down, right? So I did, there was a very practical, straightforward kind of like, this is your body is your body. Like that's nothing to feel weird about, because my mom is amazing. And I talk about this in the book. Like the first time I got a sex talk was when I was 6, because she had a tampon on the bathroom sink. And I was like, what's that, mommy? And she was like, that's a tampon. I'm like, well, tell me more, please. So she explained what it was. And like the period talk, I mean, like years before I was, most kids don't get a period talk until, so I learned what a period was. And I learned a lot at that time and why it was all normal. And I also, when we talked about our bodies in my house, it was like, that's your vagina. It's, like nobody was like, that's your down there. That's your, like, we talked very, very practically about it. So I was not made to feel weird about what my body was or what it did. There was no shame. That my parents were hippies. They owned a head shop in the 60s. So awesome. That's where I'm coming from. But then, yes, when I went out into the world, as I mentioned, it was very, very different. And I was an incredibly passionate, fiery human from a young age. And this one moment where it expressed itself in a way that people perceived as overly sexual, when it really wasn't. I was 12. Like I had never kissed a boy. Like I was extremely innocent at that time. But it definitely, the message that I got was like, being too much in that way, in that wild way, was not okay. So I kind of transferred my energy into social justice and politics. And so my fiery self was still there. It didn't completely go away, but it was like raging against the machine and like being the kid in the social studies class. It was like telling off the boys who were like more conservative or whatever, that's really where it went. And then I became like reproductive rights activist and environmental activist, all of those things. And then when I was in my 20s, it's kind of a boring story, but I basically like met a wonderful boyfriend in college and had sex with him for the first time, like with someone that I loved dearly. And that is rare. And I feel like, such a privilege to have that experience. And I'm certainly not saying in any way anyone has to wait until they're in love to have sex or wait unless that feels right for them. But that was my experience. And from there, I opened up to my sexuality in a way that was like, oh my goodness, where have you been all this time? And I've been making up for it ever since.
It is so, I personally feel, and I'd love maybe if you would share a little bit about this, because I think there is something to your own sexual liberation, or really like connecting to that part of yourself that makes you more of, I feel like, an activist for the world because you realize like your own divinity and the divinity in every living thing. I feel like it's just like it opens that door. And that's one of the reasons I love helping people understand and awaken their sexuality more, because it is, I feel like, a tool of making the world better, right? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes, yes. I absolutely agree with you. And that there's really little space between myself as an activist and a social justice adjacent person. Like, oh, that's a huge, I mean, if you look at my Twitter, you'll be like, oh my goodness, I am loud, right? Like that part of me, it's interesting, right? Like I reaccessed my sexual energy in my 20s, but like the social justice stuff didn't like go away. Like they are coming from the same place of passion. And I absolutely believe, and I have seen in my own experience with clients, that giving people more access to pleasure, to liberation, opens them up to wanting to share the infinite resource of pleasure with everybody. And especially, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is something I've been thinking about so much over the past, at this point, 7-8 months of the war. And even before the war, how much we felt like we've been living under apocalypse for years, right? Like from climate change to fascism to how everything changed in 2016, and how pleasure is more essential than it is. It's always been essential, but it is more essential than it's ever been. And to give people permission to experience pleasure, to seek pleasure, even when it seems like the world is crumbling before our eyes. Because access to our own pleasure and that spirit of aliveness and vitality is something that we can use to heal and repair the world, right? Like tikkun olam is as a word I think about, a phrase I think about as a Jewish person a lot. It means to heal and repair the world. And for me, pleasure is a tool for that as well.
Curious too, like for those maybe who are listening who are like struggle with that, really, like who feel like, well, how can I enjoy pleasure when there's people being horrifically bombed or whatever, all the horrible things, right?
All of it.
It can be really hard. And so I think I even know as an expert in pleasure, like I was like, I think I was in a frozen state of just my body shutting down from just watching the feeds and just like really immersing myself in what's going on in Gaza. And I'm a very empathetic person and just like feeling like I had a migraine for about 2 months. Mm-hmm. And so that is real, right? So I don't even name that's real too, but also the key is when we can, I want to hear your thoughts on this, because I believe that when we can find that within ourselves, that's what the powers that be are trying to eliminate from people and everything, is that access to your own joy. And I think by just taking that away from ourselves, like we're just doing what they want us to do. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I feel like there's this thing that happens when, I mean, we're watching this all in our feeds, right? And I'm like you, like I just have been like lying on the floor crying for months repeatedly and feeling so helpless. And I think it did initially like impede my access to my own pleasure because I was in a state of like just being paralyzed, right? You get paralyzed at the beginning of something like this. But I found a way to reconnect to it. And it has a lot to do with continuing to work on the book. It was handed in already. Like I had handed in my manuscript at the beginning of the war, but I've been proofreading it and going back over it and, like in it this whole time. And it's like clarified for me the kind of like intellectual interrogation of the meaning of pleasure, why it just needs to be back in the body for all of us, because it is an infinite resource. And because if we give it to ourselves and we refuse to feel guilt or shame for being alive, right? Because that's what it is. It's about pleasure is about being alive, right? And then we take that aliveness that we feel, that vitality, to use that word again, and we say, how can I make it better? How can I change this circumstance? What can I do? How can I use that to compel someone else to know that what's happening is morally repugnant and it must be stopped? And how do I get our leaders to to do that. Like to think about it, right? Like, so the more that you have access to pleasure, I know I'm like all over the place with this answer, but like the more that we stay in our pleasure, not as a thing that is frivolous, but as a thing that is necessary to living, to being alive. How can I value life more? And therefore remember every day that it is my responsibility as a person who is alive to fight for other people's lives.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think that's the key. Key.
Yeah. It's it's a hard moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that's, like you're saying, the beauty of nourishing our own aliveness is that collective. That's like, I feel like that's the final frontier of it all, right? And, when we have that capacity, then we're more able to show up in the ways we're needed to.
Yes,
right?
yes. And it can sound kind of woo, right? Like it can sound kind of out there, like, ooh, sending energy. But I've seen it in practice, right? Like, I know that when I refuel myself with pleasure, or I share that pleasure with a partner, we can then go out into the world and be warriors to make the world a better place. I mean, it may just be the people that I hang out with. I don't know.
I think too, like even like you're just saying, like that perfect example you just gave, like how you feel after an amazing encounter where you've maybe just had like the most epic orgasmic experience with yourself or with a partner, and how you feel after that versus if you're like shut down, feeling terrible, haven't had access to that in a very long time, how you show up in the world.
Yes, yes, right, exactly. And you're just going back to the Aries example, right? Like I feel like that's kind of potent because we were dealing with the first sign of the Zodiac, which is the warrior, and the fire energy. Like it's sort of evident there, like the way that, an Aries energy will shut down if it's blocked from vitality and be bitter and angry. There are a lot of reasons to be angry right now, but sitting in bitterness and anger does not help us save one life in Palestine. So what do we do? Right? Like what action do we take? Action being a very Aries word. And I think that after a delicious orgasmic experience and hopefully in the world.
I just love talking with you. I feel like we could go on and on. But I'm curious, as if there is maybe a question that you wished I'd asked that I didn't ask, or any last words that you feel like are important to share, anything you want to share.
So many things. No, I mean, I love this conversation and thank you for it. And I'm so glad that we were able to go to this place to talk about these really serious issues that doesn't always come up. And so I thank you for making space to allow me to talk about these things that are so important to me and also so complicated because of who I am and my background. And I've been thinking so much about all of this and like feeling quite concerned about how it might come up. So I'm very grateful to you for the way that we've discussed this. And I would just say this book is like, despite the heaviness of this conversation, this book is really fun. It's a really fun book. And it's a great book, although it is about connecting to your sovereign sexuality first. I really, prioritize that for people. It's also great for partnered sex and like doing the exercises across the year with a partner or partners is also a really fun way to use the book. So whenever you're listening to this, whatever astrological season you're in, you can pick it up and you can use it that way, or you can use it to learn more about your own sexuality through the lens of astrology.
So fun, because there's always so much more to learn. I love that. And I think too, I know like you just mentioned, because a lot of times I work with a lot of couples in long-term relationships too, right? There's that stagnancy or boredom that can come in. So when you have these new tools, like, ooh, let's get this book and let's play in some new ways, right?
Exactly. It's also really good for couples who are like in need of a spark. They need something they haven't, whatever, like they bought a new toy, it's not working. Whatever it is, it's like a completely new way to experiment with your desire and your play with your partner.
Oh, so good. Well, I'm excited for this book to be out in the world. It is a really fun read and so many great practices in there. And also, like you're saying, just having this lens to look through and to really realize you have a lot of superpowers already. And it can just help you work through too, a lot of the shame and things that we mentioned. So yeah, thank you so much again. And would you share just where everyone can find you and connect with you and get the book and all that good stuff?
Yes. So the book is available in all your regular bookstores, online and brick and mortar. You can find me at StefanieIrisWeiss.com. And that is Stephanie with an F. So not a PH. I know it's a little confusing for people. And Weiss is Weiss. Stephanie Iris like the flower Weiss.com. I am Stefanie Iris Weiss on Instagram. I am Eco-sexuality on Twitter. And I am Stefanie Iris Weiss on Threads. I almost forgot that one.
Beautiful. And I'll make sure too to put all this in the show notes so that you can get the book and connect with Stefanie and have fun playing with the stars and your sexuality and all of the goodness that lies therein. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you so much. This was so wonderful. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And all of you listening, we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. If you loved this episode, please go ahead and forward it right now to someone you know would love it. And if you've not had a chance yet to leave us a rave review on Apple Podcasts, please make sure to rate and review if you enjoyed it, as well as make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you want to stay connected, make sure to go to amandatesta.com/thegoods to download your free sensuality activation and stay connected. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.